Okay, welcome to the second day of solving trig equations. Just thought I'd remind you all again how happy people are to be doing these problems. I mean, I found an updated picture of that same group of students from our textbook. Well, you can read what's on the screen there. Anyway, today we're going to work on a second method. It's called factoring. It's used when you have multiple values of the variable and it's necessary to get the equation equal to 0 and factor. So, if I can get this to work here. Here's our first one. And the thing is, the secant and cosecant don't cancel out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract cosecant from both sides. And that makes this equal 0. And then we have secant of x, cosecant of x minus cos. God dang it. Okay, secant of x. They both have a cosecant in them, so let's factor out the cosecant. See if this works better. Okay, so we're multiplying two things. Cosecant and secant minus 1. When they equal 0, though, is when you multiply them, which means one of these must be 0. Either cosecant of x must equal 0, or, I don't know why it's having trouble, or there we go, secant of x minus 1 equals 0. Now in this one on the left here, I'm not really good with cosecant. Well, let's see, cosecant is 1 over the sine, right? I don't think it's ever going to equal 0. I don't think it's possible for this to equal 0, right? So that's an extraneous solution. On the other side, we add 1 to both sides. And we do the reciprocal. Reciprocal of 1 is 1. Now the cosine of what angle is 1? That's we could think about it a couple ways. We could think about the graph for cosine, right? It equals 1 up here when x is equal to 0. And notice 0 is included. And it's also equal to 1 over here at 2 pi, but we're not including 2 pi. So, really good math question. A lot of work. Answer 0. Pause it if you need to look at this. Otherwise, I'm going to move on. Okay, here's our next problem. This looks a lot like a quadratic. In fact, it looks a lot like 2x squared plus x minus 1 is equal to 0, which we would probably factor to be this. Well, instead of x's, we've got cosine of x's. So let's factor. Okay, so either 2 cosine of x minus 1 is equal to 0, or cosine of x is equal to negative 1. Well, this left side, if we go ahead and get cosine by itself, we'd add 1 to both sides and divide by 2. And we're like, the cosine of what angle is a half? Positive a half. We should be able to say pi over 3, right? Cosine of 60 degrees is 1/2. Now we do need to, again, think about where cosine is positive at. It's positive here and here, right? So in terms of the bow tie angles, we would say x equals pi over 3. That's in the first quadrant. And then in the fourth quadrant, it will be 5 pi over 3, right? Now, over here, when does cosine equal negative 1? Well, think about the graph for cosine. Here we are at negative 1, and I believe that's at pi. So we have 3 answers within here. Pi over 3, 5 pi over 3, and pi. You can also just put them all together into one statement, okay? All right, pause the video if you need to keep looking. Otherwise, I'm going to move on. Okay, another factoring one. Now this one's kind of weird because we've got two different trig forms, cosine and sine, and we can't combine them, and one of them is squared. But isn't there an identity? Right? And so that means that cosine squared equals 1 minus sine squared. So I can replace this cosine squared with 1 minus sine squared. Right, using our identity. That way everything's sines. Well, distribute. Combine like terms. Now, I am never really good with factoring things where we've got a negative with the quadratic. So what I always like to do is to divide both sides by -1, just to make that a little bit nicer. See, it becomes +2 now. So we need to be able to factor this thing. And again, we could think about it being this. And we're like, okay, we need 2x and an x. We need, let's see here. 2 sine x. Where am I getting my... Oh, geez. Okay, so, sorry, I just realized I had an error here. I'm sure you already saw it. 2 and a -3 do not make 5. 2 and a -3 make a -1. Oh, well, you know, everyone makes a mistake. It's okay. Just don't do it on your test, right? Okay, so now we go ahead and factor this thing out, and we would go, let's see here. This would factor, I think. Oh, also, when you divide by -1, doesn't it become +1? I'm such an idiot today. I'm still thinking about KU winning. Sorry about that. Well, that's what it factors to be. Set each of these guys equal to 0. Okay. So here we get sine of x equals 1. Over here we get sine of x equals 1/2. When, you know, the sine of what angle is a half? Well, that's going to happen at pi/6. But again, we need to think about where sine is positive at. It's also positive over here in the second quadrant. So we're also going to have a 5pi/6. And where does sine equal 1 at? A lot of ways to think about it. Sometimes people just think about the graph. Here we are at 1, right? And that's at pi/2. So there's our answers at. Ugh, sorry about that. Okay, pause it if you need to. Otherwise, moving on to the next one. Okay, this is our last question. And this one's really interesting. Don't write anything down yet, okay? I'm going to kind of work it out and show you some problems with this. Like, we could try converting everything to sines and cosines, you know, and bring that over there. You know, get a common denominator. It's just not going to work. Okay, so there's a lot of approaches to this one. And the one I like is like, we're like, hey, we've got two trig values here. We need to get rid of one of them. So we need to get some squared terms in here, right? We need to convert either tangent to secant or secant to tangent. So what we could do is we could square both sides. Okay, we could square both sides. And I think I'm going to rewrite everything in terms of secant, right? Like we know that tangent squared, right? Tangent, see, we know that sine squared plus cosine squared is equal to 1. And tangent squared we would get dividing by everything by cosine squared, right? So we know that tangent squared of x plus 1 is equal to secant squared of x. So we could change this tangent squared to be secant squared of x minus 1. Now, move those to the other side. You know, secant squareds cancel out. And we have 2 secant of x plus 1 is equal to negative 1. I'll subtract 1 on both sides. Divide by 2. Take the reciprocal. We're like, wow, all that work down here, cosine equals 1. When does cosine equal 1? Cosine equals 1 right there. And we would say that's when the answer x is, oh, hold on a second, yeah, x is equal to 0. Oh, wait a minute. I think you already noticed this. Negative 2 divided by negative 2 is negative 1, right? So when does it equal negative 1, which is down here? That's at pi. So the answer is when x equals pi. That's our solution. And that's the last one. All right. I will see you all tomorrow.